Well, I have some things that I don't think they're close to work, but who cares? You don't want to go. Did not do well when the health inspector showed up. The first one, I just like the name. It's called Taste of Shoe. It sounds like something you're going to eat something you stepped in, doesn't it?
Well, it's going to be really chewy.
Although it's SHU, Taste of Shoe on Park Road, 88. An employee was cutting peppers with bare hands. The inspector said stop and threw away the peppers.
Please.
Raw beef was stored on a shelf with tofu. The tofu had to be thrown out.
Yeah.
Oh, man. They had to throw out some cabbage and lettuce that was on unsanitized surfaces.
That's not good.
No. Repeat violation. Slime in the ice machine. Our favorite. Cooked shrimp, cooked lo mein, and cooked chicken. Who knows how long they'd been there?
Oh, mystery meat.
Yeah, no date on them. That was a repeat violation. And the cup they were using to scoop the rice was not sanitary.
Ew.
So the Taste of Shoe on Park Road and 88.
You might as well just eat your shoe. Put a little hot sauce on.
Now we have a place that is very popular, the Sushi 101 Noodle Bar in Valentine.
Okay, I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, well, 86.
Oh.
And they it was so bad that twice on here the inspector said, we may have to come back and shut you down.
Please do.
Sushi rolling mat was lying in the hand sink.
Ew.
That's just gross, right? Please ensure that all food contact surfaces are clean before you put food on them and contaminate it. That was a repeat violation. There was also slime in the tea dispenser nozzle.
Slime everywhere.
Yeah, so that's when the inspector wrote, if you continue to have this problem with dirty food surfaces, we may have to pull your permit.
Yeah.
They had raw and cooked sushi, not at the right temperature.
That sounds so bad.
Yeah, it's raw fish. You want it at the right temperature.
Please.
They also had items in the cooler that the person in charge said, yeah, I think they've been here longer than 24 hours.
I think they have.
So the inspector said, get rid of them. And that was a repeat violation. And again, the inspector said, if you don't get this date marking thing down with sushi, we may have to pull your permit. Sushi rice was also supposed to only be out for 4 hours at a time. They had no idea how long it had been out. And I know you eat things raw at a sushi bar, but I don't think this is what they mean. Multiple live cockroaches in the back and the bar area.
Oh, no.
Sushi 101 Noodle Bar Valentine at 86.
Oh, man.
And finally, we have a place called Truck Vietnamese Cuisine, TRUC. It's not a food truck, it's just called Truck Vietnamese Cuisine on North Tryon, 85.
Oh, man. Keeps getting lower and lower.
It's awful. The person in charge, the inspector said, lacks any knowledge of the food code and food safety. Knows nothing. That's why the person in charge was seen touching cooked shrimp and frozen dumplings with bare hands, and all had to be thrown out.
They were actually juggling them.
Observe mold growing on a container. They had moldy lemongrass in the walk-in cooler, and there was mold growing on some other containers. That's just nasty.
You'd think you'd notice that, too.
Yeah, you would. Slime in the ice machine.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, ding, ding, ding. And a slicer with food debris on it. So the person in charge took it and just rinsed it off. And the inspector had to show the proper procedure for cleaning it.
No, you don't understand. That's magic water.
So Truck Vietnamese Cuisine, North Tryon, 85 and a half. Ugh.
Oh.
So those are some low scores.
Yeah, that's Sushi 101. That's a popular place.
Oh, it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So looking at these restaurants, horrible failures, right? To the extent where the health inspector is even turning around and saying, I may pull your permit to even exist. Right? It's that bad, because especially when you're looking at things like sushi, time and temperature abuse for all food is very dangerous. But when you're looking at things like sushi, a lot of foods that go into sushi is completely raw. So you're not actually able to kill any of the bacteria that could be on there. So you rely on having ultra fresh and relatively low danger foods. But the fact is, you can have a nice piece of sashimi grade tuna, which is incredibly high quality, absolutely delicious, but it can be cross-contaminated and it can be time and temperature abused. You have to be so careful with these things. So reviewing over these things, so ready to eat foods not being handled correctly. Always, we have to make sure we handle those with either gloved hands, tongs, spoons, but we're never touching them with our bare hands. Incorrect refrigerator stocking. Again, right? It's simple. Up top, ready to eat. Then we go to to fish. Then down to steaks and chops. Then we go to ground meats. Then at the bottom, what do we put at the bottom? Right, poultry, chicken, turkey, anything like that, always at the bottom. Then having things like slime in the ice machine, we keep on hearing about this, but then slime in the iced tea machine, I mean, just gross. So fresh tea should not be kept more than 1 day. If you purchase tea like in a gallon jug from the grocery store or somewhere like that, it probably has some kind of a preservative added to it. But fresh tea, when you make it, you should refrigerate it, but it grows mold very, very quickly. It just naturally does. There are a lot of mold spores that are naturally in the actual tea leaves because they're a natural product that's just been dried. While it's still dry, perfectly safe because the bacteria, mold, fungi, things like that, they don't grow with an absence of water, but they just stay dormant. They're still there. They don't die. They just stay there. When we rehydrate those leaves, we put boiling water on them generally, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to spray boiling water all over all of them, especially with big tea machines. When you get it where they make these big vats of tea, it's kind of sprinkled that almost boiling water on top of it. That probably kills some of it, but not all of it. And then after that, they add in cold water, like cold tap water that's added into it to dilute it down. But the fact is, when you're looking at that, it's now a warm pot of tea that has mold spores in it. And then if you then add sugar, well, guess what? They love it. We've now created a petri dish, ready for them to just enjoy a nice warm bath, right? So always refrigerate iced tea when you make fresh iced tea. And if you make it fresh without any kind of preservative, which I wouldn't necessarily advocate adding preservatives, just make what you need for that day, and then make some more the next day if you want more. Okay, but you've got to be very careful with tea. So those tea urns that they use in, like, if you go to McDonald's and you see the big tea urn, and they generally use slender ones for that. You can get much bigger ones that are about 3 times the size of that as well. You have to actually clean out the nozzles, all of the tap kind of dispenser at the front. That actually comes apart so that you can fully clean it and put it into disinfectant to properly clean everything out. Otherwise, they start to grow slime that will literally just kind of sit in that tap. Right where that joint comes in, where you turn it on and off, it just sits right there. Unless if you're the unlucky one that gets the blob of slime that drops out into your tea. Think about that next time you're sipping on the tea through a straw and you can't see inside the tea, right? I'm not trying to turn anyone off tea, but just be careful when you're dealing with tea. If they don't clean that machine, then yeah, you could be in for a roller coaster ride. Date marking, right? We all know if I open a packet of cheese up today, then I have 7 days for it to be used up or trashed, one way or another, right? So any of those high risk foods that we have, we've got to make sure that we take good care of them and we date stamp them and we dispose of them when they're out of date. Hand sink problems. Yeah, they had sushi mats that were sitting in the hand sinks. It's just going to set the health inspector off. Don't have anything in there. Don't block it. Make sure the hot water and cold water's on. Make sure you got the towel or the hand drying machine. Make sure you got a trash can for the paper towels if you're using that kind of method. Make sure you got soap. Make sure the soap's full, right? You should never have any of these problems coming up. Cross-contamination issues, that's a big problem as well, especially for the time and temperature abused sushi. That's a massive problem. And then pest issues. Well, guess what? If you have a dirty kitchen, you're probably going to have pests too. That's how it goes. Because they're looking for food, they're looking for shelter, they're looking for water. If you provide them with all those things, you're going to have pests. It's a guaranteed thing. And then overall, having managers that are not properly trained, well, that's what creates a lot of these problems, right? And that's where if you guys can get this certification, you can be working out in the industry, even though it's a part-time job during school, however you want to play it. The fact is that you would be technically a health inspector working for the operation that you're with. You would be there as a responsible person to make sure that they understand and to make sure that all of the employees who are there understand what they should be doing. Because apparently, from what we hear, a lot of people either don't care or they just don't know. They don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, so like I said, we're going to go through this study guide. This study guide is not an all-encompassing thing. You cannot rely on this to get you through the exam. You have to understand everything that we have been studying through all the other sessions, okay? But this just helps you to kind of focus on some of the things that we need to know. So, many food safety and contamination concerns are matters of common sense, right? We know that. But when it comes down to all of this, is that even if you know about it, you may not bother, or you may have a disgruntled employee who says, whatever, not my responsibility. I just got to come in, make the egg mayonnaise, make the sandwiches, and then leave, right? So we can't rely on everyone having common sense, having knowledge automatically, or caring about what they're doing. Food should be both heated and cooled in certain temperatures, should not be left out for extended periods of time, should be covered and stored properly, should be stored separately from chemicals and cleaners, etc. Following these guidelines will not only ensure that food is kept safe from foodborne illnesses and contaminants, but it's imbued with the highest quality and care possible. Right? The foodborne illnesses are illnesses bred from bacterial food contamination. These include illnesses such as E. coli and listeriosis, an infection from listeria exposure. Listeria you actually get a lot in cream cheeses and soft cheeses. Ensuring that foods remain free from foodborne illness can be achieved in two ways: through proper storage, proper cooking. Okay? When it comes down to it, we have time and temperature on our side because we have full control over it. Proper storage requires that food handlers store all food between below 41 for refrigeration or exceeding 135 for hot food holding. Foods held between these temperatures should only be given a 4-hour window when they're either placed back in storage or thrown away. Foods being cooked should first be cooked to 135 and higher to kill any remaining germs. Right? So we know that we have multiple layers on that as well. We'll talk about those in a second. While the majority of foodborne illnesses result from bacterial contamination, some illnesses have been caused by viruses and diseases from food service workers. For this reason, it's vitally important to wear protective gear when handling food. Keep hair away from food, avoiding skin to food contact. Practice proper hygiene through washing your hands for a minimum of 10 to 15 seconds. And I know that throughout the pandemic, we've always talked about 20 seconds. I would highly recommend continuing 20 seconds of lathering up. I believe that will become the standard and we'll see a change in this. But for now, on the exam, 10 to 15 seconds is considered to be the norm, okay? I'm sure it will be updated to 20 seconds as we go forward, but at the moment, that's still the standard, okay? Let's see. So, while foodborne illness pose a risk to everybody, certain populations are at more risk than others. So we have young children, the elderly, and people who have immune deficiency problems, immunocompromised. Okay, so those three groupings, we have to make sure that we take extra care. It's not unusual for me to see an exam question come up where it will ask about one of those three. So it may say, in a care home, is it which of these foods is it not recommended to serve? And it may have something like poached eggs, like underdone poached eggs, because normally a poached egg will leave the yolk runny, and it may be like turkey or tuna, something like that. Well, so it's probably in that case you need to think about, yes, I'm serving it to and the elderly. They're part of this grouping where they're at higher risk, and if it says poached egg, then a poached egg, it's quite normal to serve a poached egg underdone. So that wouldn't be something that you would recommend in an elderly people's home where they could be at risk for food poisoning, for salmonella food poisoning from that egg. Okay. Biological, physical, and chemical contaminants. Food contamination takes on many different forms, including biological, physical, and chemical forces, as well as potential allergens. Contamination can occur due to improper food storage, storing food next to chemicals, to improper growing conditions, to exposure to parasites, and incorrect use of preparation materials. Below each of these, we're going to be tackled. So, first of all, though, real quick, parasites. How do I make sure that my food does not contain parasites when it comes in? What's the one best way that I can use to make sure that I don't have parasites? I'm sorry?
Reliable source.
Right. A reputable food supplier who we know has their supply chains in check to make sure that it's safe. We're very lucky in this country where that's the case. There are a lot of countries around the world where you just don't have that guarantee of safety. We do. It's a big reason why we purchase from reputable suppliers. Biological contaminants are contaminants found in nature. These include bacteria, parasites, fungi, and environmental toxins. The best way to prevent contamination from biological agents is to adhere to food storage and preparation guidelines, keeping food at the proper temperature during storage and cooking. Time and temperature. Bacteria thrive in most environments between 41 and 135. Guess what? Temperature danger zone, right? The FDA considers 3 types of bacteria to be the most dangerous, and they're very contagious and cause severe illness. Salmonella typhi, Shigella, and Escherichia coli, more commonly known as E. coli. And let's see, the other thing I was going to mention is within that 41 to 135, does anybody remember where bacteria are most likely to be at most high activity? Say again? Yes, exactly. From 70 to 125. Because down at 41, refrigerated, or even if it's 42 or 43, that's a cold day, right? Think about yourself in that situation. Because if you didn't have any clothes on and you're outside and it's 42 degrees, you're probably going to die from exposure, right? It's a cold day. But at 70 degrees, room temperature, where we are right now, because the bacteria doesn't necessarily have a coat on, they can form a spore to protect themselves. But they are most comfortable between 70 and 125. They love it there. It's not unusual to see a question asked, what is the most, what temperature range is the most virulent for bacterial growth? And they may give the option of 41 to 135, knowing that most people are like, oh, temperature danger zone, sure. Be careful, be very careful. These questions are put in there to make you think as a manager, whereas the most dangerous part in the process of cooling foods or heating foods, 70 to 125, that's where the bacteria are just having a field day. They love it because they're comfortable, just like we would be as well, right? Let's see. So salmonella comes from people and is often found in beverages or ready-to-eat foods such as fruits and vegetables. Best way to prevent salmonella is to wash your hands and ensure that all food is cooked to the proper temperature. Shigella originates in human feces. It's spread from flies and improper hand washing. Best way to prevent Shigella is to observe good hygiene practices and eliminate insects from around food. E. coli originates from cattle intestine and is found in ground beef or fresh produce that may have been contaminated from farm runoff, such as lettuce and strawberries. Right, so that's where, even as a vegetarian or a vegan, you have to be careful of E. coli. Even though it generally originates in cattle, we have to be aware of the fact that very often the cow dung is then taken and used for manure. It's got a lot of great nutritional value to it, so it really does a good job, and it's a natural product. Problem is, the way that a cow digests all that grass to be able to actually make something, to get all the energy and to get all the nutritional value that it needs to get. You're looking at a 2.5 ton cow, and all it lives on is grass. To be able to maintain that size of an animal, just eating grass, they have to have a special setup in their intestines. So they have multiple stomachs that start to ferment all of the grass to be able to draw out the nutrition. If we ate grass, we would die very quickly because we can't digest things like grass, right? We just can't. It's fiber, which is good for us because it helps food pass through us, but it's not going to give us all the nutritional value we need. So they have a special system that does that, but by that fermentation process, it does encourage a lot of growth within their stomachs that harbors E. coli. So from that cow manure then being sprayed out across that field, then we plant that romaine lettuce. That's exactly how we end up with the E. coli scare a couple of years ago with all that romaine lettuce all over the country. So it can be treated so that way they can heat treat it so that way we're not creating that kind of problem. But if that system breaks down somewhere, if we have a failure somewhere, then all of a sudden that what looks like very innocent romaine lettuce coming into your door could be harboring a problem. Okay, so we have to be very careful. It's another reason why when we're preparing vegetables and fruits and things, if you go from one to another, we should be switching out or wash, rinse, and sanitize that chopping board between different food products, just to make sure that we're not creating a cross-contamination issue, especially with ready-to-eat foods that we're not going to be cooking. Okay, that could be a critical failure. Let's see. Viruses do not grow in food, but can be transferred to food through the fecal-oral route. Sneezing, coughing, and improper hand-washing practices are some of the most common routes of transmission. Hepatitis A and the norovirus are the most common viruses found in food. They're typically linked with ready-to-eat foods and shellfish. So especially ready-to-eat foods, they're not going to be cooked any further. This is a big reason why we don't ever handle those things with our bare hands, while we're always using gloves, tongs, spoons, anything else, but not your bare hands. And obviously, personal hygiene is a big deal. Okay. Parasites, most often found in seafood, wild game meats, and foods that have been washed with contaminated water, where the parasites are in the water. To eliminate parasites, always cook food to the recommended temperature. If the seafood or meat is supposed to be served undercooked or raw, such as sushi or sashimi, ensure that it's stored at the proper temperature and served to the guests immediately. Right? We saw a failure in that with this sushi restaurant. They just weren't paying any attention to that. The risk factor there is massive. Fungi. So this includes yeasts, molds, mushrooms. Fungi pose a problem when they produce toxins that can make the consumer sick. Always make sure that the mushrooms you are serving are safe to eat. You cannot go shrooming. You can't go out into the forest just picking some random mushrooms. Ooh, look how pretty that nice bright red one is. You might kill someone, okay? You cannot take that risk. That really does take a professional to be able to do that. I don't know how much I would even trust that. There's such a massive risk factor. I forget the name of them now, but the mushrooms that will very often grow in your perfectly manicured lawn are mushrooms which are highly toxic. So when after it rains significantly, and even if you got a beautiful lawn out the front and you get some mushrooms kind of growing up, you should never allow your dog, if you have a dog, to go out there and roll around in them and start chewing on them or anything. It can kill them. So they're very, very toxic. So eating the wrong kind of mushrooms, bad decision. Always be sure the mushrooms you are serving are safe to eat. Throw out any food that has developed mold. In addition to the typical vomiting and diarrhea that many foodborne illnesses cause, ingesting toxic fungi can also cause neurological symptoms such as reverse hot and cold sensations or tingling in the extremities. It can be a very nasty thing, and it can be life-threatening, but it can also be life-changing as well, even if it's not life-threatening. Okay, physical contaminants. So physical contaminants refer to contaminants of an actual foreign physical object, right? A paperclip gets dropped off the paper where you had the menu written down into mac and cheese. You were you cut your finger earlier in the morning. You put a Band-Aid on it. You were making some potato salad, and oh, where'd that Band-Aid go? Now I've got a physical contaminant, right? So we have to be very careful. Big companies like Tyson will actually have on their conveyor belts as their chicken goes off the production line and finishing up. They'll go through metal detectors just to make sure a nut or a bolt didn't fall off their machinery as the food was processed. These big companies will do things like that because they have the means to be able to do that. We have to use our eyes to make sure that we don't have any big problems happening like that. We've got to be very, very careful. Protect your food. That's why when it goes in the refrigerator, we cover it. That's why whenever we're working with food, we don't have other things kind of gathering around it that could drop into it that could cause that contamination. This can also be a problem of, when you hear on Dirty Restaurant episodes, when we hear about people who have their own personal beverages, like in a glass container next to the food. These are huge problems because there's two problems there. That glass could get knocked over, shatter the glass, could get into the food. The drink itself that you were drinking up to your mouth, no matter how good you are at drinking, there's going to be some backwash going in there. That's a contaminated liquid and the glass that could smash into there. These are huge problems that could cause us issues with our food. Okay, so these can include other foreign pests in food, may refer to shards of broken metal or other small, potentially hazardous objects that may be found in food. This can include human items such as fingernails, hair, skin. The best means of avoiding this particular contamination is through inspection of food and the observation of safe food preparation and hygiene guidelines. Chemical contaminants. Chemical contaminants are contaminants from cleaning supplies, improper surface materials, improper metals, and pesticides. Right, so all of our countertops, they're all stainless steel. They're made of that product because they're very, very hard, very, very strong, easy to clean, very difficult to damage. Because if you have big gouge marks in the counter surfaces, then that can harbor different problems in there. But also, say if you had so our plastic cutting boards all have the NSF logo on them because they're made from food grade plastics, which are very, very hard, easy to clean. They don't gouge so easily. They have to be replaced every now and again because once they start getting scratch marks in that can't be properly cleaned, they have to go too. But if you buy a cheaper chopping board, it may look exactly the same when you first buy it, but if it's not NSF standard, then it may be made of a softer plastic, maybe made of a plastic which can start breaking down with the food in contact with it. If you think about it, some of the foods that we actually cook with can be reactive foods. They can be highly acidic, or they can be very alkaline. They can actually start to react with those plastics and start leaching plastics from the board into the food. Right? That doesn't happen with the NSF plastics because they're extremely hard and they're made to not react with foods, no matter how acidic or how alkaline they might be. But so that's why we always work with those types of products, which are very hard-wearing and high quality. Let's see. To avoid chemical contamination in other mediums, store and use cleaning materials a great distance from all foods, and wait the recommended time before using a surface cleaned with chemical agents. Adhere to the rules of food preparation and avoid using soft or unsafe materials and plastics in cooking. So in general, I just don't like to use plastic to cook in. I'd much rather use a metal product or a glass product because they're a lot more hardy and they don't tend to leach anything into the food itself. The only other exception I would say is aluminum pots and pans. They're being phased out now. There has been seen a link between aluminum and an Alzheimer's disease, right? Because aluminum is technically a toxin. Now it's like, well, but it's a strong metal. Why would that be a problem? Well, aluminum is actually a fairly soft metal overall. So say if you have a whisk, say if you're making a bechamel sauce, a white sauce, and you're whisking that sauce to make sure that there's no lumps in there in an aluminum pot, that whisk is probably a stainless steel whisk, which is a much harder material than the aluminum pan. As you're whisking in there and scraping the sides of that bowl, you can actually scrape microscopic amounts of aluminum off into your bechamel sauce. Okay, so even some metals like that really should be phased out. That's why we're bringing in carbon steel, very, very hard and non-reactive, and stainless steel, again, extremely hard. So that way it's a safer product to use. But in general, metals and glass are the best things to be able to use when we're baking, boiling, cooking things. Plastics, I wouldn't use those when you're using high heats. All right, important things, allergens. While allergens are not safe for everyone, even the slightest amount of exposure to a food allergy can prove toxic. For this reason, you must acquaint yourself with the equipment that you use, the manufacturer's facilities, your food employees, and the ingredients found in your food items. To avoid allergen exposure during food preparation, be sure to clean, sanitize surfaces. Right, so that's how, if that comes up in the exam, we're asked about what do I do to avoid cross contact. So remember, when it comes to bacteria, mold, fungi, we talk about cross-contamination. When it comes down to food allergies, we call it cross-contact. Okay, remember that. So, but when it comes down to these things, in order for us to be able to use that chopping board again, we must wash, rinse, and sanitize for both allergies as well as bacterial, viral, and fungal issues. Okay, it's the same process. Wash, rinse, sanitize. It should be sufficient. Okay. Now, if you really have significant issues, then that with either you or with customers, that's when you can actually recommend having completely separate equipment, separate knives, separate chopping boards, separate mixing bowls, things like that, to actually have for people with those specific allergens. Okay. It comes down to what your facility is willing to do and needs to do, depending on what your clientele is like. Let's see, acquaint yourself with common food allergies and be aware of the presence of these allergens in your food. So we got the big ones here. We have nuts, peanuts, dairy, soy, gluten. Oh, I got soy in there twice. Fish and wheat. Those are the big ones. Make sure you remember those, okay? Oh, I know which one I'm missing. Eggs. That's why I've got soy in there twice. Let's change that right now. The food, so the flow of food. As the food comes in and out of your establishment, it requires safe handling and preparation. While it may seem simple enough to receive and store food, you must ensure that all received food is stored properly and within its safe use dates. As food enters and leaves the establishment, it must consistently be monitored for freshness and safety. Right, that's where we can take temperatures on foods. We can be monitoring the time that it may be inside the temperature zone or allowed to be in that kind of range. So with purchasing, receiving, and storing, when purchasing food, always be sure to purchase from reputable establishments, right? Reputable supply chains. While it may be tempting to ship food in from unapproved areas or go to the cheapest food option, adhering to safety guidelines while producing and storing food is pivotal. It can either go horribly wrong or it can go perfectly well. Read company statements and practices before deciding to purchase with that particular entity. Make sure that safe practices are being followed. When food is being received, it must adhere to all federal and state guidelines. In addition, you must ensure that all food is delivered at safe temperatures. Here are some guidelines to help. Right, so 41 or below, that's outside of our temperature danger zone for most cold foods. Live shellfish, very important, live shellfish. Milk and eggs can be allowed to be accepted at 45 degrees, right? But if you're looking at already shelled shellfish, so dead shellfish, that must be below 41, okay? Or 41 or lower. 135 for hot foods or above. All frozen foods must remain frozen during delivery. So you cannot accept those shrimp that are all clumped together because at some stage they have been defrosted and refrozen. Because you don't know when they were being defrosted, if they just sat out on a dock for a whole day, someone realized, ooh, crap, let's put them back in the freezer. They'll be fine. What could possibly go wrong? Well, they may not be eating them, but if you and your customers are, then that could be catastrophic for you and them. No matter which type of food you're handling, it should always be promptly stored after being received. Proper food storage. Cold foods, 41 or lower. When hot foods have to be stored, 135 or above. Failure to do so will likely result in the introduction of foodborne illness due to bacterial contamination. So this also includes ambient foods, foods which are not going to be stored hot or cold, but are stored in our dry food storage. You must make sure that they are promptly put away. Because if they're not, when they come in, they may not be in the best location to be away from any pests or anything like that. That's why all of our storage racks are all at least how many inches off the ground? At least 6 inches off the ground, right? Minimum. Makes it really hard for those rodents, for those pests, bugs and things to get at it. Okay? Make it hard, they'll move on. Make it easy, they're sticking around for the party. So in preparation, as mentioned above, proper food preparation is essential in delivering safe, high-quality food. When preparing food, be sure to use only high-quality metal and plastic utensils. Be sure to properly clean and sanitize all preparation surfaces and utensils. When cooking vegetables and fruits, we should be exceeding 135 or above. Fish, steaks, pork chops, over 145. Ground meats, 155 and above. Poultry, 165 and above. Okay. Any questions on any of those? Okay. If you need to draw yourself a diagram to remember this kind of stuff, then do that. However you want to work it. But in exactly the same direction as that temperature goes up, their placement in the refrigerator goes down. Right? The most dangerous poultry goes down the bottom, cooked to the highest temperature, working its way all the way up to things like fruits and vegetables, ready-to-eat foods that go all the way up at the top that are a much, much lower risk. Make sure to consider the container material as conductive materials such as metals will cool faster than. I've already skipped on. Before cooking, food should be thawed via either cool water, refrigerator, or microwave, or as part of the cooking process. Right, we talked about that for defrosting foods. Cooling foods should be completed as quickly as possible to limit pathogen growth and maintaining food quality. Once foods reach 135, they must be cooled to 70 within 2 hours, right? So when they're cooling down, so it's boiling right now, they're cooling down, we're cooling them by some form. As they get down to 135, you're now hitting the temperature danger zone. You've got 2 hours to get it to 70. Rapidly cool it. Because that features the 70 to 125 super duper time for all bacteria to enjoy themselves, right? So we're moving through that as quickly as we can. Take out that temperature zone there that's going to just encourage growth. Get it cold as quickly as we can. If this is not successfully done, the food must be reheated to 165 and cooling reattempted. The biggest problem that you're going to have here, you're going to start damaging the quality of your food if you're having to reheat it, try and cool it, reheat it, try and cool it. You're going to start really damaging the quality of the food. Once at 70 Fahrenheit, a further maximum of 4 hours is permitted to reach 41 or below. As can be completed using ice as an ingredient, placed in a blast chiller, using ice and water baths, an ice paddle, or spreading foods across a wider area, among other things. So making sure to consider that the container material as conductive materials such as metals will cool faster than an insulating plastic container. Right, so if you're putting it into an ice bath, then don't put it into an ice bath in a plastic container because it's not going to have anywhere near as much of an effect to cool it down as quickly. When serving food, be keenly aware of all food temperatures Food should not be allowed to remain between 41 and 135 for too long. Cold food, not refrigerated, cannot be allowed to rise above 70 Fahrenheit and must be discarded after no more than 6 hours. Right, so cold, refrigerated food starts off at 41 or below. It can never hit 70. If it ever hits 70, gotta go. But if it never hits 70 degrees, you have a maximum of 6 hours. Okay? When it comes to hot food, it cannot be left out for more than 4 hours. This is when it's not heat maintained. Yep. If it's not maintained at the correct temperature, then it can be allowed to stay out for up to 4 hours. But then it must be discarded. So serving already served food is not permitted unless if the food is sealed and untouched. So what does that mean? So food which has already been served, say if you got a fish taco, you serve it to someone, they're like, no, that's not, you put it down, you come back to them 2-3 minutes later, and they're like, no, that's not what I ordered. You got to take it back. You cannot serve that to another table. It's been at that person's table. You don't know. They picked it up, looked at it, rifled around in there. You can't trust it.
They don't wash their hands probably, so
right. Food. Well, even if they wash their hands, it's ready to eat food.
Yeah.
Bare hands, can't do it. Right? We're not allowed to do it. Customers can't do it either. Right? If that food comes back, it's trash. But if you have food which is sealed, so if you get a ketchup container, right, little ketchup packets, if those are in like a little container on the table, it's okay to leave those there. That's okay because they're still in sealed units. Okay. Breadsticks, if you have breadsticks in like sealed wrappers, they can stay on there. But if you have some sliced bread or if you have biscuits that are in an open basket that's plopped down in the middle of the table, then if the table doesn't eat them, then when that table leaves, they've got to go in the trash. You cannot try and reuse those because you don't know what's happened to them. You don't know if they've been coughed over, sneezed over, rifled through, touched. You just don't know. You cannot ever take that risk. Okay. Finally, self-service stations, buffets, should only be used with fresh plates. I.e., when you go through a buffet, you should get a fresh plate before you go back through the buffet. Otherwise, you can be causing cross-contamination issues with a dirty plate going back over to that buffet. Okay, patrons should not be permitted to reuse dirty plates or utensils because they can contaminate dishes placed out for service. Food safety management systems. Before employees are permitted to work with food. Well, let's see. Where's my thing? There it is. Okay. I'm just working this down before I go and click it too far. Okay. Before employees are permitted to work with food, safety programs should have taken place instructing the proper implementation of personal hygiene, food service and preparation, and managerial practices. Managerial practices include consistently checking food stations and workers to ensure the necessary practices are being observed. Management should also never admit fault in the case of foodborne illness outbreak. Instead, management should work to discover the initial culprit and immediately eradicate such cause. Okay? So someone calls up your establishment. Hey, we came in your establishment. We just left half an hour ago. I've been throwing up ever since. You don't say, oh, I'm so sorry. I cannot believe we've done this to you. Right? You cannot make that assumption. You are not a food scientist. You're not from the Department of Health. You are not the person to make the determination. Okay? But you are the individual who can take down all of that information and take it seriously, take their concerns very seriously, take down times, take down what food they ate and everyone else at the table ate, and then after that, you're reporting it to the Department of Health. They will investigate it. They'll come in to see you, but they'll also go to your reputable suppliers that you have invoices from showing where you purchased that food, those bare raw ingredients from. They'll probably test the foods that you have in the kitchen. So don't necessarily throw everything out, but make sure that you label it, do not use this chicken, and have it in a separate location Still maintained it, whether it's refrigerator or freezer, however it's maintained, but keep it separate, label it really well. Do not use, but do not throw away. Okay? They're going to want to come in and investigate everything. Chances are, if you're doing everything you're supposed to do, then they'll find that. They're very, very good at what they do. But they'll discover that, and they may discover that farther back in the supply chain, that's where the problem originated. It was nothing to do with you. You did everything you possibly could. Or it could be that that person says, yeah, I ate the fried chicken, and I've been throwing up ever since. But when you actually start asking, so you had the fried chicken, what did everyone else at your table have? Oh, everyone had fried chicken. Okay. You're the only person that's throwing up. Now, don't make accusations. You're just taking down information. Let the Department of Health make that ruling. But then the Department of Health is going to interview that person, and they're going to say, so what else did you eat today or that day? Oh, well, we went to an ice cream parlor before then, after my lunch, and then for lunch I had a turkey sandwich. And they'll go through all the way through that full day, going all the way back to try and figure out what it was that made them sick. Make sure that you're always giving correct and accurate information, gather correct and correct information, because it could be that that person had that ice cream earlier on from that ice cream parlor, and that was the source of the food poisoning. And so it had nothing to do with you, but because the last thing they ate, they're making the assumption it must be that. Well, if you and these 3 other people at your table all had that same fried chicken, then why wouldn't they have a similar kind of reaction to it? Right? So, but never try and make that determination. Don't apologize for it, but be empathetic and say, let me take down all the information. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We want to make sure that nothing like this can happen again. And so we're going to help you and the Department of Health to determine exactly what happened to make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay? So always be very careful with that. So cleaning and sanitation. Cleaning and sanitation are extremely important in maintaining a well-rounded, safe eating environment. Proper cleaning will help eradicate pests such as mice, cockroaches, while sanitation will assist in warding off the foodborne illnesses and cross-contamination between food items. Following the procedures for cleaning and sanitizing will ensure both workers and customers enjoy a hassle-free, safe dining experience. The principles of cleaning and sanitation. Cleaning and sanitizing are different actions, but generally go hand in hand. Cleaning is the process of removing the food or other items from the surface. Sanitizing is the act of removing organisms from the surface to improve safety and reduce the risk of exposure to harmful bacteria or fungi. The two come together in a compound process: wash, rinse, sanitize, and air dry. Failure to complete these steps in that order will result in an ineffective washing and sanitizing process. Both cleaning and sanitizing agents should be stored well away from food items, and rags and other cleaning tools should be changed at least every 4 hours to prevent contamination. That's why we generally use paper towels for our sanitizing, because that way I know they're not going to be hanging out or lingering. Another big question that I see come up quite often in this exam. They'll ask, so if we were to use cloths for our sanitizing bucket, then they ask, where should you keep that cloth? You keep it in the sanitizing solution. Okay? That way, whatever happens to that cloth, afterwards it's sitting in that sanitizing solution, killing anything that's on that cloth. If you put that cloth out, hanging over a tap handle or something like that, then it's just encouraging things to possibly get stuck onto there and grow in there. Okay? You should always keep that sanitizing cloth should go into the sanitizing solution in between uses. Okay? Pest management involves 3 steps: denying pest access to the establishment, denying pests food, shelter, and water, and then working with a licensed pest control operator to remove any pests that have made their home for themselves. While prevention is best, be on the lookout for signs of any existing pest issues. These include roach droppings and egg casings, pepper-like like spots and cases that look like they're thick grains of dark rice, and rodents droppings, and actions including gnawing and nesting, leaving tracks. Just as cleaning agents should be stored away from food, on-site pest removal agents must be stored away from food. Professional pest removal should be completed after business hours and after employees have gone home, and all surfaces should be cleaned and sanitized thoroughly before use. So we have a licensed pest control within our district that comes through on a monthly basis, and they take care of making sure that everything here is done within the protocols of what is safe, so that we're not just spraying different types of solutions all over the place. They're very, very specific in the way they do it. They literally go around the very perimeter of the entire facility with the products, and then we have some traps around, although those traps are actually are needed less and less these days because we don't have pests in here. But it's good to have an ongoing solution, especially for a building as old as this, right, which has been drilled into and banged around over many, many decades, more than half a century. It's inevitable that there's going to be more easily accessible areas. So we just make sure that we don't have anything that's inviting. We don't provide food, we don't provide water, we don't provide shelter for them. And because of that, most of the time, they're not even going to want to come in. But then if they do, then they find that we have treatments in safe areas of our facility so that they're not going to make it. Okay.